First, this happened yesterday. Are we ready with this?
As we prepare to get ourselves underway, they're going to have to wait that little bit longer because, as we now know, customary up and down the lands that respects are paid. And they take the knee. Adverse reaction from the Millwall fans. Wow, that is not good at all. Questions will be asked about that for sure. That's an absolute shocker.
That was commentator Adrian Durham from talkSPORT's Game Day live coverage of yesterday's match at the Den, where Millwall and the opponents took the knee for Black Lives Matter, as happens at every match now in the professional leagues. And the fans allowed back into the ground for the first time since the coronavirus crisis began way back in March, registered their complaints by booing this gesture. Now, of course, these Millwall fans have been horrendously dismissed as awful racists, and this was a scourge on football, terrible thing to happen. But, are they racists, or have they just had enough of this, what I think is a kind of a pretty empty, futile gesture? By all means, do it if you must. But surely the meaning of it, commemorating George Floyd, who died quite a long time ago, surely the meaning of this gets weaker every week, every match. Is it fair to dismiss these Millwall fans for booing, and will it happen a bit more in the future? Because it's the authorities seem to be very keen on this weekly or this every match gesture, take the knee. The fans, not so much. Let's talk to the editor of Spiked Online, Brendan O'Neill. Afternoon, Brendan.
Hi, Kevin.
Your feelings, is it fair to dismiss these fans as just racists, or are they just fed up with this gesture that seems to have been going on forever? I think they're possibly just asking how much longer are players going to take the knee before every match.
I don't think it's fair at all to dismiss them as racist. Certainly there's no proof that they were being racist. There's no proof that they had a racist intention when they booed. It looks to me, as you were saying, it looks like these are ordinary fans registering their disapproval of this bizarre weekly neo-religious ritual that has taken hold of football, where for months on end, footballers have been taking the knee to Black Lives Matter and really to the identitarian agenda more broadly. Football has been completely swallowed up by this bizarre woke ideology. And I think what's really remarkable about the Millwall fans booing is that, as you say, this was the first time fans were allowed back to games. They'd been expelled from football for the past few months because of lockdowns. And that means that football could be taken over by these nutty ideologies that the BBC loves and the Guardian loves. But when normal people finally get back into the stadiums, they say, nope, we're not having this. We don't like it. We want to watch football. We don't want to be lectured to by those people who think they're cleverer than us.
Yes, and it's a blatant political gesture, isn't it? I mean, we're supporting Black Lives Matter, which has actually now formed itself into a political party. So what the hell has this got to do with sport?
It's completely political. And what's really frustrating, this slogan, Black Lives Matter, as a statement, everyone agrees that Black Lives Matter. What's really remarkable, when I hear these kind of Guardianista liberals banging the drum saying Black Lives Matter, I always think to myself, have you just figured this out? Everyone else has known that forever, that Black Lives Matter as much as every other life. But Black Lives Matter, the movement, is something very different. Black Lives Matter, the movement, is an ideological movement. It has lots of strange, eccentric ideas, including being against the nuclear family and wanting to promote, fairly eccentric forms of transgenderism and so on. And it is pretty anti-Western, very divisive, very identitarian. It cleaves to the idea of critical race theory, which essentially says all white people are racist and all black people are victims. This is a political movement. And football fans are saying, we don't want to watch a spectacle where our players are having to bow down, literally a gesture of subjugation. Kneeling down is a gesture of subjugation to a political movement. And that's what fans are protesting about. I think they're absolutely right to do that, and they ought to have the right to do it too.
And I think a lot of other clubs had better get used to it, because I know lots of football fans who have been rolling their eyes at this taking of the knee. It's not that they're racists. They They just don't think it should happen at football matches, and they don't see why, when they're watching football, they have to be assailed by this ritual. I should say, Brendan, literally, just as we've been talking, as luck would have it, Millwall Football Club has issued a statement to say that it is quote, dismayed and saddened by the fans booing players kneeling for the Black Lives Matter movement at yesterday's championship game against Derby County. Now, this strikes me as the kind of corporate virtue signalling that prospers away from ordinary life. So ordinary people are being made to accept these gestures, whereas they have no real interest in them, but still the authorities will look down on them and say, well, we're dismayed and saddened. Another sign that the football authorities are out of step with ordinary fans.
Completely, and you're right. This is Black Lives Matter is an entirely corporate exercise at this moment. I mean, it's supported by all the big corporations around the world: Nike, Spotify, Apple, all the rest of them. You can't escape the Black Lives Matter message. You can't watch Britain's Got Talent or The Vicar of Dibley. You can't listen to a political speech these days without seeing the Black Lives Matter ideology, and it's constantly being foisted down people's throats. This is a corporate establishment ideology. It's a very divisive one. And the fact of the matter is, this is what I find so frustrating. Football had problems with racism in the past. Absolutely no one would deny that. There were some horrific things happened in the past. But at the moment, football is one of the least racist professions in the UK. You know, around 30% of professional players are black. They're worshipped by kids, black and white kids. You know, football fans go to football every week and cheer to the rafters for black players as well as white players. This is a perfect example of people pulling together and not letting race get in the way. That's why the implementation of this BLM outlook into football is so depressing, because it's bringing the ideology of race into a game where it has successfully been pushed out, and which is actually incredibly fair and a really good opportunity for young working class black men. And I think players are sick and tired of being lectured to by the woke elite, and that's what the Millwall fans have demonstrated.
I would also point out that, whilst of course all countries have some problems with racism, including Britain, Britain is an extremely unracist country by international standards, and that George Floyd was the victim of American police brutality, not British police brutality. He died in Minnesota. So that's another reason why I think football fans saying, why are you assaulting us with this week in, week out? It hasn't really got much to do with us. I think that's a fair point. Glad you brought up the Vicar of Dibley, because that's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. I know you must be a massive fan and were thrilled that it was coming back for this Christmas special. Now turns out that the Vicar of Dibley, as played by Dawn French, the character is called Reverend Geraldine Kennedy, is it? Or is it Granger? I said Granger earlier. Anyway, she's called Geraldine. She has dedicated this episode of The Vicar of Dibley to a solemn sermon about the importance of Black Lives Matter, removing from the church notice board all the things about lost buttons and decimalisation, which was part of the comedy of the show, the old-fashioned nature of this traditional British village, and replacing those posters with a big poster saying Black Lives Matter. It's just ridiculous, isn't it?
It sums up the whole thing, because essentially what this is the BBC giving a sermon to the plebs. That's what's happening with this Vicar of Dibley thing. It's a religious style sermon. No doubt the Vicar of Dibley will take the knee and bow down and encourage the rest of the masses.
Unless she does take the... No, there's a picture of her taking the knee.
Right, well, there you go. And so it sums up the whole thing. Wokeness has become the new religion in this country. It's the establishment religion. It's the ideology through which these people presume that they are better than the rest of us, and presume that they have to constantly lecture the rest of us about race and gender and all these other ideas. The fact that people are pushing back against this, I think, is incredibly positive, because they're not pushing back because they're racist. As you say, Britain is one of the least racist countries around. People in this country get on very well most of the time, and what they don't want is this new idea idea coming from above which says you have to think racially all the time, you have to constantly obsess over the fact that you're a white person or a black person. This is the great twisted irony of the Black Lives Matter moment. Just at a time when people were becoming post-racial, in comes the chattering classes saying, no, you have to obsess over race all over again. The Vicar of Dibley, this sermon, I think, sums up how irritating the woke religion has become, and I think we're going to see a lot more rebellions against it.
Okay, prepare to split your sides. I'm going to give you a sneak preview of this scintillatingly hilarious script from the Vicar of Dibley at Christmas. Here is the vicar delivering her laugh-a-minute sermon. I don't think it matters where you're from. I think it matters that you do something about it, because Jesus would, wouldn't he? Until all lives matter the same, we are doing something very wrong. We need to focus on justice for a huge chunk of our countrymen and women who seem to have had a very bad, weird deal from the day they were born. I mean, that is hilarious, isn't it? I mean, that's going to have them rolling in the aisles.
I can't stop laughing. I mean, it really does demonstrate they're even sacrificing comedy to the woke ideology, because that is patently not funny. And of course, it's not really designed to be funny. It's designed to raise awareness, as they say, which is just PC code for lecturing the stupid throng. That's essentially what's happening here. And comedy has, in fact, been one of the victims of the woke ideology, because you're not allowed to crack any kind of joke these days if it is remotely offensive or if it goes against mainstream thinking. I think it'd be interesting to see how many people watch The Vicar of Dibley. It'll be interesting to see how many people write letters of complaint or kickback against it. We can predict what will happen. They'll be called racist, they'll be called scumbags. But the truth of the matter is, ordinary people are increasingly sick and tired of being looked down upon as racist scum. And they're going to stand up for themselves and say, we're anti-racist, but we're not going to be lectured to by people like you.
So the Vicar of Dibley, as we discussed, I think the Millwall situation indicates the immense dichotomy between what the football authorities feel they ought to do and what the fans feel they ought to do. And the Vicar of Dibley, of course, once again reveals the widening chasm between the way the BBC bosses think and the way their audience think. This is getting to be a big problem, isn't it? That the elites, if you like, have no regard for what their audience or their fans or supporters feel and believe.
I think that absolutely, that's hit the nail on the head. The fact that the Vicar of Dibley revelation, that this is going to happen, and the Millwall booing, the fact that they've happened around the same time, tells us a really important story about this country, which is that there is a massive divide between the elites, the cultural and political elites, and ordinary people. Now, that divide was kind of hidden over the past few months because ordinary people were shunted out of the public sphere. We weren't allowed to gather in public, we weren't allowed to go to work in some cases, we weren't allowed to go to the pub, and we weren't allowed to go to the football. So people had been silenced, essentially. They didn't have a voice in the way that they did in the past. So the tensions between the elites and the people were kind of hidden, and everyone was just apparently taking the knee in public. But now, ordinary people are coming back into the public sphere. They're back at football. They're back at the pub, so long as they order a substantial meal. And I think we're going to start seeing people saying, no, we've had enough of this. We want to stop this virtue signaling nonsense, stop this constant self-flagellation over a terrible killing that happened months ago, thousands of miles away. We want to get politics back to normal. And those tensions, I think, are going to blow up over the next few months.
Yeah, do you sense there will be a rebellion by the people against the elites and the authorities who keep thinking they can tell the people what to do?
Well, I think that we're living through a period of rebellion. I mean, really, since the vote for Brexit and all the various things that have happened since then, we've seen loads of instances of ordinary people expressing their disdain for the elite consensus. And I think that's one of the worrying things about Boris Johnson's government at the moment. It does seem to a lot of us that Boris is moving away from the kind of red wall voters who put him into power in order to get Brexit done and to push back against all this woke bureaucratic nonsense. He seems to be moving away from those people towards elite consensus opinion. He's embracing pretty extreme green ideas. He's not taking a hard stand against transgender extremism as some people expected he would. And he didn't stand up for British history and British traditions very well during the BLM uprising over the summer. So there's a lot of disappointment, I think, with Boris too. And the ordinary people's sense of exhaustion with elite condescension, I think it's going to take different and interesting forms over the next year. And that's really a story all of us should be watching.
Now, when Gary Lineker was a player, Brendan, he was known for his extraordinary speed, but he never managed the lightning speed he does now when he virtue signals about all such issues as this. He was in there fast as hell, saying the racists of Millwall. What can we do to shut Gary Lineker up?
That's a good question. Gary Lineker really sums up the kind of decadent nature of the contemporary bourgeoisie in some senses, because he's paid his incredibly handsome wage is paid for by us, ordinary people, through, we're forced by law to fund the BBC, and all that sloshing money gets handed out to incredibly wealthy people like him and others. And then they just look down their noses at ordinary people. They express contempt for ordinary people all the time, whether it's Millwall fans, whether it's the millions of people who voted for Brexit or the millions of people who voted for Boris Johnson. They just look upon those people with utter naked contempt. And those are the people who are paying their wages. I mean, this is an unsustainable situation. And I don't think we've heard, a handful of Millwall fans booing has sent the establishment and the media into absolute fury. They cannot handle this. Well, they've heard nothing yet. That was a handful of people just saying, no, we don't like this, taking the knee. Wait until they hear millions of people saying, listen, we still want Brexit. We're sick of woke ideology. We're sick of political correctness. So if they're shocked by the Millwall fans booing, they haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that they better get used to it. There'll be more of this happening on football pitches. And it's not because I think the fans are racist. They're just at the eye-rolling stage of this process. They just think they've had enough of it. But I've never had enough of you, Brendan. Thank you so much for your time on a Sunday morning. Wise words, as always. Brendan O'Neill, the excellent editor of Spiked Online.